What I took was the positive of the power of love, properly lived. It had no thought for tomorrow. It had no thought for this might kill me. It only thought somebody else needs this. Somebody else needs my attention. Somebody else needs my care. Somebody else needs my thought, my prayer, whatever it was that you had to offer, you could add to somebody else's healing or somebody else's betterment.
There is an interesting thing that I read that says that 50 years after your death, nobody will remember you. And here I think, but we're coming up to 25 years after certain people have died, we're still talking about them, we're trying to tell a story to keep them alive. But one day, even her son will not be remembered because he didn't have children. When the parents died, who's there to remember her son? The world kind of shrinks in that kind of memory sense. And I think that's really poignant because they were all such important lives.
You know, we were all double gloved and double gowned, and he was kept in an isolation room. All of his cutlery was plastic, paper plates, even his notes had infectious written on them. We didn't touch them without gloves on. You know, his bedding was burnt. I mean, it was just horrendous.
But what I really remember is how conversations became less easy to have the closer this thing got, and as people started actually being affected. Me being me, I wanted to continue these conversations with people and just talk this thing through, and people were closing the doors because of, I mean, fear. The first thing that happens is that people just stop talking and stop being able to share honestly because people were scared for their lives. So from the early conversations of just staying up all night and wondering what the hell was going on, it became something that was much harder to talk about.
After Terry died, I went to the physicians and said, well, what did he die from? And they said, well, you're not family, we're not telling you. A year later, I ran into them and they said two things. One is, if you want to know what Terry died of, you can read it in a medical journal because we published a paper on it. And we're really surprised you're still here. We expected you to be dead.
I was actually, at that point, having an affair with a girl, and I was staying with her in a hotel and watching the news, and a boy that I'd been sleeping with a lot came up on the screen, and the world literally stopped still for me because the voice said, so-and-so has developed the new killer cancer last year, and he was talking, and literally it felt like every cell in my body stood still and shrieked.
Why are we a group of people that couldn't share this terrible illness? Our sexuality, and now this illness came along, it was like we didn't have the normal right, like someone has, oh, you've got cancer, or I've got a brain tumor. It was like we had to, be ambiguous or tell untruths about it. We didn't want to, but we found we had to.
Huge stigma. And I spoke to patients sometimes who had a dual diagnosis of HIV and AIDS, and they said they were so relieved when they got a cancer diagnosis because it was the first time they could tell the whole world, I'm not looking well, I've got cancer. Because if you had cancer, you got pity. But to say you had AIDS, you couldn't say that at all. You still kept it under wrap and key.
As I said to people, you have to understand, imagine getting into your 40s, building your career and your circle of friends that you have dinner parties with and you socialize with. And then in the space of 3 years, 40 of them are just wiped off the face of the earth. Now you tell me how you're going to behave. Because there's no manual for that, there's no book for that. But equally, the rest of the world doesn't know what's going on. The rest of the world is oblivious to you. Not only oblivious, they treat you as diseased pariahs.
Well, my way of dealing with it was total. When Jeffrey died, that was without a doubt the most seismic event. It was a tragedy of kind of epic proportions in my life. So I stopped my entire career and went and volunteered at the Terence Higgins Trust. And I had a big career in musicals. I was doing very, very well. My family were furious with me, but I couldn't be anywhere else. The only place I wanted to be was in that place on the Gray's Inn Road, volunteering and trying to, how can I describe it? That was, the only way I can describe it is, it's the only place I knew I had to be.
The great move in the 1970s to demedicalise and to put women in control of maternity services, that was picked up on by the very first people with AIDS who were saying, nothing about us without us, we need to be in control as much as we can of our health and our health services. So in the best places, there was real interaction between the community, led by people with AIDS and their needs, and clinicians who are prepared to listen and think about the consequences of that.
Yes, we may be able to live a almost normal lifespan, but not well. And if we just focus on not dying, that doesn't mean anything to us. Because the fact that, for instance, I'm not dead is, that's the place you start from. That's not the place you finish.
And suddenly here I am within touching distance of, of retirement age, and I haven't had a paid job for 20 years. I have no pension. I probably won't have a state pension. I have no property. And yet at the same time, both Paco and I are so thrilled that we are alive.
And I remember one of my colleagues actually years later got diagnosed with HIV, and he came onto the ward on a stretcher. It was closer than the previous patient. It was almost more like family. And it was shocking going into his room every time. He looked so dehydrated, so cacaxic. He looked so poorly. And when he got better and he wanted to use a bottle rather than have a catheter in or whatever else we used to do, and I used to stand outside that door, heart thumping, what if he falls? What if I'm not there to catch him? And of course nothing terrible happened, and he survived. He was a little bit older. He was in his late 30s. And at a Christmas do a couple of years later, we were all sitting around. It was a work Christmas do. And he was sitting over there, and he said to no one in particular, he said, "I'm so glad to be alive." And it still chokes me to think of that, because I felt the same.
It seems to me that the history of HIV/AIDS must teach us the value of compassion, must teach us the value of hope, because what seemed utterly dark and pointless and cruel has been treated and has been turned into something of hope. And especially in these days when things are strange and turning, you want to hold up this beacon of togetherness and solidarity and unity.